Under the wide purple sky of a distant farming world, the endless fields of glowing crops stretched in every direction, their soft light swaying in the wind like waves on an alien sea. And in the middle of this beauty rolled the great harvesters, huge machines with shining blades that cut everything in their path, never slowing, never stopping, only moving forward to claim what the farmers had planted. But near one of these machines stood a small alien girl, her thin body trembling, her eyes wide, her feet unmoving as if rooted to the ground. And a few steps away her own family turned their backs and walked quickly into the shadows, leaving her behind as though she were a burden too heavy to carry, their voices low and hurried as if they feared being seen. The roar of the machine grew louder with every second, a deep grinding sound that shook the earth beneath her, and yet she did not scream or run. Perhaps too young to understand the danger or too afraid to believe she had been abandoned. Dust rose in the air. Glowing bits of crop fragments floated like fireflies around the moving blades, and the smell of metal filled the wind. Other workers passed in the distance, their faces hidden under wide hats and masks, too busy to notice the lonely figure standing in the harvester's path. And for a moment it seemed that the machine would swallow her whole without anyone caring. Then, from the edge of the field, one pair of human eyes caught the sight of her, and the man stopped in his tracks, his heart striking against his chest as he realized what was about to happen. He dropped the heavy tools he carried, his boots sinking into the soft soil as he ran, pushing through the tall glowing stalks, the hum of the blades echoing louder and louder in his ears. Every second stretched long, every breath heavy, and still the child stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the approaching monster of steel. The harvester's lights shone on her face now, bright and merciless, its shadow crawling over her small form like a predator ready to strike. And for one terrifying instant it looked certain that no one could reach her in time. Yet the human pressed forward, his body moving with desperate speed, his eyes never leaving hers, his voice calling out though the wind carried his words away. In that moment, the field became a place of suspense, where the line between life and death grew razor thin, and the question hung heavy in the air: would he reach her before the blades, or would the silence of the harvest claim her forever? The blades of the harvester sliced closer, throwing sparks as they struck hidden stones in the soil, and the human pushed his body harder than he ever had before, each stride sinking into the dirt, his lungs burning. Yet he would not stop, because the little alien girl still stood there, frozen like a statue, her wide glowing eyes reflecting the deadly machine that bore down on her. And in that instant, he threw himself forward, arms outstretched, scooping her up in a rush of movement just as the metal teeth slashed through the space where she had been, the force of his dive sending them both tumbling into the crop field. Dust and stalks flew into the air, and the machine roared past them, missing by only a breath, leaving behind a gust of hot wind and the shaking ground. The girl clung to him with small hands, her body trembling, yet she made no sound. Not a cry nor a scream, only a silence so deep it unsettled him. He lay still for a moment, catching his breath, his heart still hammering, then slowly sat up, brushing dirt from her hair, and looked back toward the field where the harvester continued on, blind to the lives it had almost taken. Workers in the distance had paused, some staring, others whispering, but no one came to help. And when his eyes searched for the family who had left her, he found nothing but empty rows of crops swaying under the wind. The thought struck him like a cold blade: she had been abandoned on purpose, left to die beneath the blades, and he could not understand why. The girl looked up at him then, her eyes shimmering with a strange mix of fear and hidden knowledge. And though her lips parted, no words came out, only a faint trembling breath. He lifted her gently into his arms, rising to his feet, his mind racing with questions he could not answer. And as he walked back across the field toward his small outpost cabin, he felt the weight of unseen eyes on his back. The workers returned to their tasks too quickly, heads lowered, as though they wished to erase what had just happened. And this silence was more disturbing than any noise, as if the entire colony wanted to pretend the girl did not exist. The human tightened his grip on her, his steps steady, his thoughts filled with a growing sense of unease, for he knew that machines were not the true danger here, something far colder. and crueler had placed her before those blades, and whatever it was might still be watching, waiting for the chance to finish what the harvester could not. The small cabin stood at the edge of the glowing fields, built from metal sheets and old wood, a lonely shelter against the vast silence of the alien farmlands. And into this place the human carried the trembling girl, setting her gently on a chair while he lit the dim lantern that hung from the ceiling, its soft light chasing away the shadows, but not the questions that swirled in his mind. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her thin arms wrapped tightly around them, watching him with wide eyes that followed his every movement. And though he spoke to her in a calm voice, offering food and a cup of water, she gave no answer, only blinking slowly as if weighing whether to trust him or remain in her silence. He placed the food on the table between them and waited, yet she did not move, and the only sound was the creak of the cabin walls against the night wind. Outside, the fields whispered in the dark, but that whisper soon changed as flickering lights appeared in the distance, weaving through the crops like pale fireflies, too many and too organized to be farmers at work. He stepped to the window, his heart tightening when he saw the shapes of tall figures moving carefully between the rows, their lamps glowing blue, their shadows long and sharp against the ground. They were searching for something or someone, and the thought made him turn back toward the girl, who now sat very still, her gaze fixed on the door as if she already knew they had come for her. He lowered the lantern's flame, the cabin dimming into near darkness, and crouched near her, whispering for her to stay quiet. She gave a tiny nod, yet her eyes glistened with fear, and he realized she had been through this before, hunted like a stray animal, abandoned by those who should have protected her. The lights outside drew closer, their glow pressing against the windows like watchful eyes, and the sound of heavy steps reached his ears, measured and deliberate. Not the footsteps of farmers, but of people who knew how to track. He held his breath, his hand tightening around the metal tool he had carried home earlier, his thoughts racing with the question of why the girl had been left in front of the harvester, and why these strangers now came searching with such determination. The child's silence seemed to hold the answer, but she would not speak, and so he stood in the dark cabin, waiting as the figures moved through the field, hoping they would pass by, yet knowing deep inside that their search would not end until they found what they wanted. The next morning the human decided he could no longer keep the girl hidden in his small cabin, for the memory of the blue lights sweeping the fields still burned in his mind, and he feared the strange figures would return. So he wrapped her in a long cloak and carried her into the nearest town, a place of narrow streets and low buildings where farmers traded tools, fuel, and food beneath the pale glow of the sky. As he walked with her through the market, he noticed how people turned quickly away, their eyes dropping to the ground, their conversations breaking off in sharp whispers, as though the very sight of the child unsettled them. When he asked simple questions if anyone knew her, if she had kin nearby, the merchants only shook their heads, some even stepping back as if his words carried danger. The girl stayed pressed against his side, clutching the cloak tightly, her silence unbroken. Yet her eyes darted toward the alleys as though she expected someone to appear at any moment. Soon enough, his unease sharpened, for at the far edge of the square, the same tall figures he had seen the night before now stood watching, their pale lamps unlit in the daylight, but their presence just as heavy, their faces hidden beneath smooth masks that gave nothing away. They did not approach him immediately, but as he moved from stall to stall, they followed at a steady distance, their steps in rhythm with his, a quiet pressure that turned curiosity into dread. Finally, when he left the market to return to the road, the men closed in, their shadows stretching long across the dust, and one of them spoke in a low but commanding voice, demanding he hand the girl over, claiming she was not his to keep. The human felt the girl's small hand grip his sleeve tightly, her body trembling, and in that moment he understood she trusted him more than anyone else, perhaps more than she ever had her own family. He faced the masked strangers with steady eyes and told them she would not be taken. Not by force, not by threat, but his words only deepened the silence around them. For the townsfolk had vanished into their homes, doors shutting, windows closing, until the street was empty but for him, the girl, and the hunters who stepped closer with each breath. The tension wrapped around him like iron chains. his heart pounding as he realized he had stumbled into something far greater than an abandoned child, and whatever truth was hidden in her silence was worth enough that others were willing to chase, threaten, and perhaps kill. Still, he did not move aside, and as the masked figures circled, the girl pressed her face against his chest, her small voice at last whispering the single word that sent a chill through him: "Please." The word hung in the air like a fragile thread, and the human felt it cut through the silence sharper than any blade. For it was the first sound the girl had given him since he carried her from the field, and with it came the weight of a secret too heavy for her small shoulders to bear. So when he pulled her closer and stood firm before the masked figures, he did not speak again, but waited for them to make their move. The leader of the hunters tilted his head, a faint hum coming from the device at his belt, and then he said that the girl carried something that did not belong to her, something hidden within her mind that their masters wanted returned. At this the girl shook her head violently, her eyes wide with terror, and her voice broke through again, halting and trembling, explaining in rushed whispers that her family had left her because of this very thing, because inside her mind rested patterns of knowledge placed there by rebels who sought to fight against the rulers of this world, patterns she could not understand, but that others believed could change everything. She told him they feared her not for who she was but for what she carried, and that abandoning her to the blades had been their way of erasing her, without blood on their hands. The human listened in disbelief, his thoughts spinning as he realized she was both a child and a vessel of dangerous information, and the hunters were not merely trackers, but enforcers sent to make sure such knowledge never left the soil of this colony. His grip tightened around the tool he carried, his eyes darting to the empty street, knowing escape would be near impossible, but also knowing he could not hand her over to those who would silence her forever. The leader raised a hand, and the hunters stepped forward, their boots crunching against the dust, their masks gleaming under the pale light. And in that moment the girl buried her face against him again, whispering that she wished she could give the secret away, wished she could be normal, wished she did not carry the weight that made her a target. The human bent his head close, whispering back that she was not alone, not anymore, and though his words were simple, they gave her enough courage to lift her face, her eyes glowing faintly as if the very knowledge inside her sparked like hidden fire. The hunters halted at the sight, exchanging a brief look between them, and in that pause the human pulled her close and took a step back, his mind racing with the single truth that no matter what danger followed, he could not let her be taken, for she was not a burden to be left behind, but a child who deserved to live. The hunters moved closer, their steps slow and careful, their masks giving away no emotion, but the human could feel the tension growing in the air like a storm ready to break, and he knew that if he stayed still for even a heartbeat longer they would take the girl and erase her from existence as if she had never lived. So he turned quickly and darted into the narrow alleys of the silent town, carrying her in his arms while the sound of boots thundered behind them. The streets twisted like a maze, doors slamming shut as they passed, windows locking, not a soul willing to help. And still he pressed forward, his breath sharp, his arms aching yet refusing to let go of the child who clung to him, as if her life depended on the strength of his grip. The hunters followed with perfect rhythm, their movements too precise to be ordinary men, and in the distance he could hear the low hum of machines stirring awake, as if more reinforcements had been called. He cut through the back paths until the fields opened once more before him, the harvesters crawling across the horizon with their endless blades, a wall of moving steel that seemed to mirror the danger pressing close behind. He paused only for a moment, the girl lifting her head to look at the machines with fear. But then she whispered something soft that the patterns hidden in her mind were not just knowledge, but a kind of key, a map that could show the way to freedom if only they could find someone willing to use it. Her words gave him no full understanding, but they gave him reason, and with reason came resolve. He shifted her weight in his arms and pressed on toward the darker edge of the farmland, where the stars began to shine through the fading light, their cold glow guiding him away from the town, away from the reach of the masked hunters. Behind him, shouts rose and blue lamps flared, but ahead stretched the open unknown, and though the risk was heavy, he felt a spark of defiance kindle in his chest. The child had been left to die, unwanted and unloved by those bound to her by blood. Yet she had been found by him, and in that truth there was a promise he silently made to himself that she would never again face. The blades alone, never again be abandoned to silence and fear. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever storm they drew upon them, he would shield her as long as his strength held. For sometimes the difference between survival and destruction came down to a single choice, and his choice was clear.